Richard? That's what the minutes thing, you're sort of doing those by acclamation now anyway, right? You don't, no matter how many people vote on it.
I am going to ask for, you have to vote. Yeah, I'll do it. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to the special meeting of the discussion of the Highlands Street collection at Issaquah Highlands Preliminary Plat Community Conference. We have some administrative things to do first. We have some minutes from previous meetings that we have to approve, so I'll go ahead and do that. Hopefully, commissioners, you've all had a chance to read the minutes. Are there any corrections? Okay, hearing no corrections, the minutes are approved as submitted. So move forward, we're going to I'm going to talk a little bit. We have the community conference for the High Street Collection Preliminary Plat, and I just want to explain that the purpose of the community conference is to generate discussion, to raise issues, and to propose creative options on the proposed preliminary plat. This meeting is intended to provide a means by which the applicant, staff, the commission, and the public can work together in a productive and creative manner to initially review the proposal's compliance with the comprehensive plan and the Issaquah Municipal Code. The structure of tonight's community conference is that we will first hear a presentation from the staff regarding the preliminary plat application. Then we'll hear a presentation from the applicant regarding this application. And after that, we'll open the meeting to public comments. And finally, the commission will have the opportunity to ask questions of the staff and the applicant, as well as to provide comments. And so when I open the session for public comment, I'm going to ask that if you would sign in. That's not a requirement, but if you want to be included as a party of record, I'm sorry, I just went brain dead for a minute. Party of record, we'd like you to sign in and give us an email address, and we'll be able to keep you included in all the discussion that goes on. So are there any questions or comments from the commissioners? Okay, then let's turn it over to the staff, Ms. Sloman, for staff presentation.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Lucy Sloman, Land Development Manager, and I'm making the presentation this evening introducing the community conference. I don't really need to go through this, but it's essentially what Richard said, that we're having an informal meeting to gather information from the applicant, staff, community, and commission. This slide is my sort of standard slide about the difference between a preliminary plat and a site development permit. I know there's some unusual aspects of this one, but because the commission primarily focuses on site development permits and doesn't do preliminary plats, I just wanted to provide a little sort of standard context that we give. As you know, a site development permit, the property lines have already been established, and you're really studying in detail the design of vehicular and pedestrian areas, the circulation, the parks, the plazas, building elements, and landscape. With a preliminary plat, we're primarily looking at the subdivision of land, making sure that the parcels, lots, and tracts are appropriately sized, located, and shaped for their purposes, and we are not typically reviewing what's on the land except to make sure it works for the size. So, for instance, is a tract wide enough to accommodate the road that's planned for it? In terms of the context, the property under review is the yellow piece here. To the east is Grand Ridge Plaza. To the south is the Swedish Development Agreement area, as well as their hospital and medical office building. To the west is West Highlands Park, which is a residential area. Sort of nestled into the reverse L of Shelter's property is an area called West Ridge, which is all residential, a combination of townhouse condominium projects and single-family plats. To the northwest is Lakeside Gravel, which also has their own development agreement. And to the north is the Issaquah Highlands Park and Ride. The main way into the project is Highlands Drive, which at Discovery Drive becomes a couplet with 9th Avenue. Just to give you some images to sort of help set the context, this is the property under review here. This is a series of photographs. The first one is looking across the northern part of the property. You can see it's relatively flat with hills to the west. The second photo is looking east and towards Highlands Drive and some of the residential, as well as sort of where Issaquah Highlands begins to step up into the foothills. Photograph 3 is along the southern end of the property. And photograph number 4 was taken up in Pinecrest, which is a neighborhood that's, I don't know, 75 feet above where Grand Ridge Plaza is. And so the yellow triangles kind of mark the extent of the property. It's about 1/3 of a mile long, a little more. So that kind of gives you the larger context. The Plat consists of almost 21.5 acres. There are 5 blocks and 2 lots per block. This just gives you a sense of each of those lots and blocks, blocks and lots. The total, this chart that is provided on the Plat distributes the zoning cap among the various lots. It does not distribute it to the individual lots. I circled the residential only because while they do have 3 residential units of entitlement, they cannot be distributed 1 per lot because it won't meet the minimum density. So at some point, those will probably have to be consolidated into a single location. And just for context, the commercial equals about 65% of Issaquah Highlands' total commercial entitlement, and the retail is around 50% of the total entitlement. A big part of the Plat, obviously, is the streets that create the various blocks. Many of the streets have existed for a long time. For instance, High Street and 9th Avenue have been present for 10 or 15 years. Some of the other streets that are shown in gray, such as 8th Avenue, Deer Lane, and 6th Avenue, are being built by the Westridge Project in cooperation with Shelter. And so those do quite a bit towards completing the street grid in the area. There are 2 streets that will, through the Shelter property, that will be entirely built by them. One is Federal, and the other is 8th. 8th is, there's quite a bit of 8th already built, but this one particular connection has not been made at this time. Almost all of the streets are have a road classification of sub-collector 1, except for Discovery Drive. The reason Discovery Drive is shown in blue is that although Discovery Drive is present, it was built by Microsoft as a sort of phase 1 of the roadway. And when they went away and the use and development of that area changed, we didn't know whether that roadway, how that roadway would have to be completed. The traffic study that the applicant has provided shows that it starts with a higher level road classification for the first block, which is a minor arterial, then steps down to a collector arterial, and then to a neighborhood collector. So each block, as traffic peels off, the road gets smaller. But as I'll show you in a second, the north side of the, portions of the north side of the road are not complete. So this is a series of images of various roadways. For instance, if we start at the north, High Street is already built. Streets like Deer Lane have just been constructed. That's this road here. 6th Avenue is another one that's just been constructed. Discovery Drive on the east side, as it's shown in this image here, has sidewalks, street trees, curb, and gutter. It appears to be complete. I don't know whether it needs to be widened. That's part of what we'll review in detail with the plat. But when we get to this western portion, you can see that there is no sidewalk, there's no curb, there's no gutter. It just has a fog line and a drainage ditch. That was the way it was left in its kind of interim state. 8th Avenue, in this image, you can see that we're looking north, and you can see that it just ends. This is the location where that one block of, sorry, my mouse disappeared, 8th Avenue needs to be built. And then at this point where 8th intersects with Ellis, Polygon has built this block. They are in the process of building this block. So when out in the field right now, it is mostly finished south of Ellis and not really built north of Ellis, but the permits have been issued, and so we anticipate its completion. When you look at Ellis from up in Pinecrest and look down on it, you can see that it looks mostly complete. It's quite wide until you get just past 9th Avenue. This part of the image is 9th Avenue. And then because of the way Microsoft built the entry of Ellis, anticipating their campus with almost 3 million square feet of commercial, it was built as a really massive roadway. And so as part of the coordination between Shelter and Polygon, Ellis has been designed to neck down from that much wider road into a more traditional, just 2-lane road with parking. And finally, 9th Avenue is complete, as I mentioned. The circle on here, it's a little hard to see, I imagine, but there's a bicyclist there. That side of the road was designated as a multi-use trail, even though it looks more like a standard sidewalk. And you do see bicyclists coming up from the valley floor, robust bicyclists coming up from the valley floor. Pedestrian system is almost completely associated with the roadways. Sorry, it's much more, the colors are much brighter on my screen, so I'm always checking to see how well it comes across on yours. Most of the streets that are in this darker blue are planned or have been built with sidewalks on both sides. However, for instance, streets like High Street has a sidewalk on the south side, bike lanes on both sides. In the future, when Lakeside develops, we anticipate a sidewalk on the north side, but at the time, it is still a gravel pit, and we really don't want people walking close to that. Additionally, this section of 9th Avenue, when Microsoft was looking at developing the 150 acres for their campus, this block was planned to be infrastructure. It was not going to have a building on it, so it was not built with a sidewalk on the east side. So it has a sidewalk on the west side to serve this property, but not one on the east side. And Discovery will have a bike lane along the north side of the block. There is one trail that is proposed with the plat, and it will connect to a trail system that goes all the way along the western edge of what was called Development Area 4 of Issaquah Highlands. And so that will connect to other trails in the area and provide a kind of continuous route through much of this portion of Issaquah Highlands. In terms of next steps, we will prepare a community conference response memo. This is much like the briefing response memos that you've seen with site development permits. Staff and applicant, if they choose to, will work on preparing responses to any comments, questions, and concerns. Before you are 6 emails that were received in the last 24 hours. And looking at my phone a moment ago, I see additional ones have come in. We have had no opportunity to do much with those, and so the response memo will incorporate those comments into the various topics and respond to them in that way. Once that response memo has been prepared by staff and the applicant, if they choose, we will make it available to parties of record in the commission for a 2-week comment period. If there are additional comments that have from the parties of record or the commission that you feel that were not appropriately reflected in the memo, and that makes sense relative to the code that we're looking at, we will incorporate those. Subsequently, we will prepare a staff report to go to the hearing examiner. That response memo will be an attachment to the hearing examiner staff report, and the hearing examiner that will be part of the various materials that he or she considers in reviewing the plat. That's all I have.
That's a question. Any questions right now? Or do you want to wait till the applicant is, okay? Turn the time over to the applicant now. Thank you, Ms. Sloman.
Oops. Microphone would be good. Thank you, Lucy. Good evening. My name is Gary Young, and for the benefit of the record, and also for those that have not yet or have not yet met, I am the co-founder of Shelter Holdings with my partner Jeff Gow, and with our families, we're the owners of the former Microsoft property, and that is the subject of tonight's community meeting and conference. Shelter Holdings is a local family-owned real estate business. We, over the last 35-plus years, have been building residential, mixed-use, commercial projects throughout Oregon and Washington, and including some here in Issaquah. We also have an ongoing presence the past 20 years working with a number of the local nonprofit organizations here in Issaquah. Some of those would include Life Enrichment Options, the Issaquah School Foundation, Eastside Baby Corner, and the Issaquah History Museums. Jeff and I acquired the Microsoft property some 6 years ago and began developing plans with the community and the city and many design professionals. There have been different iterations of those plans over this period of time. However, since 2016, we have been pursuing the commercial and the retail development allowed under the Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement. The plat that is the subject of the hearing tonight is part of that effort. Through the course of these efforts, we heard from the community about the desire for more commercial and retail uses consistent with the existing Issaquah Highlands community and consistent with the character of the design guidelines for Issaquah Highlands. The application before us tonight is another step in this process as we look forward to updating you and working towards adding the retail and the commercial opportunities here in Issaquah Highlands. With that, I'll now turn over our presentation to Tia Heim, and then followed by Jackie on my right, and then Eric Evans. So thank you very much for having us tonight.
Thanks, Gary. For those that don't know me, I'm Tia Heim, and I'm part of the development team at Shelter Holdings. For those that had to sit through our previous hearings, I promise you won't listen to as much of me tonight as you did on the past hearing. Before Eric gets up here to walk you through our application, there are a number of corrections to the information that's been provided by the city and objections that we need to make for the record. So although we are always happy to present information about our proposed projects and to hear from the community, we want to state for the record that the city is processing our application pursuant to the wrong regulations. The city has acknowledged on many times that this plat is vested to the development agreement, and that includes the Appendix L, which is the processing portion of the development agreement. Our plat application should be being processed under those regulations, not the new replacement regulations of IMC 1819B. If our plat was processed under the correct regulations, the application wouldn't be before this commission and wouldn't go before the hearing examiner. We received a draft of the staff report that Ms. Sloman provided for this conference on Monday, the 5th of August, after close of business, and we're asked to provide any input that we had by 10 a.m. Wednesday, the 7th. Well, we complied with this very tight turnaround and provided both a red line and an email that explained the corrections that were needed. Virtually none of those were made in the staff report that was provided to you and to the public. So this puts us as applicant in a very awkward position where we're having to make those corrections and point out those items in this public forum. This is particularly problematic because there are many legal and factual errors and omissions in the staff report. So what we're going to do is provide for the record a copy of the comments on the draft staff report that we provided to the city, which show those corrections that were needed. So what Jackie is handing out now is both the red line that we provided, a comparison between our version and the version that you received as part of your packet, and the email that went to Ms. Sloman. The most fundamental problem with the city's staff report is that it not only applies the wrong regulations for process, it also applies the incorrect regulations to the application itself. As I said, the city's acknowledged on many occasions that the plat is vested to the development agreement, yet the city's memo applies the replacement regulations of 1819B and provides no explanation as to why they're applying the replacement regulations to a vested application. Our plat application vested prior to the existence of 1819B, so there's no way that 1819B can apply to a vested application. Another issue that we have with the materials provided is that they're a bit incomplete and a bit random in nature. So I'll give you a couple of examples of that. One is the project narratives. So items 2A and 2B of the materials that were provided with the staff report appear to be the same thing, the same version of the project narrative. The city staff report inaccurately states that we made a separate submittal on 8/28/17. We did not. The 8/28/17 documents are actually the same as the 8/1/17 submittal, but there was an issue with the way that the city accepts documents through its online system, mybuildingpermit.com, and there weren't appropriate categories to upload all of the items. So we had tried to deliver a physical copy to the city, which they rejected and told us to upload the documents online, put them in incorrect categories, and that they would fix them. So again, kind of a silly correction, but it leads to everything being presented in an odd way. It also leads to the next problem with item 2C. 2C is labeled as a 3/5/17 submittal. I assume that that's a typo and it actually meant to be labeled as a 3/5/19 submittal. But regardless, the 3/5/19 submittal, which was the most recent submittal of our plat application materials, we included a supplemental plat narrative at that point. And again, for some reason, the city chose not to provide that to you. So we're going to submit a copy for the record tonight. I think it's also relevant to point out that the materials that we saw on the city's PowerPoint tonight were largely new to us. Those were not really our materials. Those were things that city staff, I guess, prepared and never shared with us prior to this meeting, which is just a bit unusual from our perspective. Another one of the corrections that we provided to Ms. Sloman for the staff report was the chronology of events related to processing of this plat. She elected not to share those with you, but we think it's important to give you a full and complete picture of the chronology of how this plat application has been developed and reviewed before today, and exactly how long this has been in process. We began this platting process with the city in early 2017. The application was submitted and deemed complete over 2 years ago on August 1st, 2017. Of the 744 days that this plat has been in process, approximately 602 of those days, or over 80% of the time, we were waiting for the city to provide something that we needed to keep this plat application moving forward. We were required to wait 228 days before we received our first set of comments on the plat application. The city staff completely ignored the processing timeframes that the city had promised to follow when it entered into the development agreement. The full and accurate timeline for processing of this plat is provided in the red line version of the staff report that we submitted for the record. Throughout this process, the city's treated this plat application and our SDP and ASDP applications, which are pending separate from this application, differently from applications that are similarly situated. There's no valid legal reason for applications to be treated any differently. There are many examples of this, but to name a few, the city has processed our applications more slowly than other applications in the Highlands. They've recognized that another applicant, Polygon's vesting included vesting to process, but then took the opposite position with respect to our application and has determined that our vesting doesn't include vesting to process. They required more detailed information be included in our application materials than is typical, and then in the staff report wrote that we had provided a high level of detail that was beyond typical of plat review, which is true, but then admitted that the city hasn't reviewed any of that material that they required, despite having had it for 2 years. Additionally, the staff report provided doesn't include a recommendation, nor does it include any proposed conditions. Based on past practice at community conferences, it's my understanding that recommendations and proposed conditions are typically included for this type of conference. We have no way of knowing if the city is recommending approval or if they intend to impose any conditions on our plat application, which seems odd at this stage of the game when we're trying to have a conversation about how it moves forward. At the initial pre-application collaborative meetings for this plat application, the city indicated that this is a very simple plat, which is true, and that they didn't anticipate much review, nor did they expect many conditions. So perhaps they've returned to that way of thinking. We simply don't know. At this point, I will turn it over to our legal counsel, Jackie Correa, to make a few brief comments, and then we'll let Eric walk you through the application. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Jackie Carey with Foster Pepper here on behalf of Shelter this evening. I've had the opportunity to meet some of the commissioners in past hearings before. For those of you that I haven't met, it's nice to meet you this evening. I'll keep my section very, very brief. Tia hit on a number of the factual and to an extent legal problems with the staff memo that we received in advance of this. We've identified and provided for the record this evening what we view to be an accurate version of a lot of those facts, and are expecting that those facts are incorporated in the revised community memo that's supposed to come out after this. We're happy to continue to provide comments in that process, but do expect that there are actually revisions in response to the corrections that we're making. The city has told us on multiple occasions, as Tia mentioned a moment ago, that Shelter's plat application is vested to the development standards under the development agreement. We're submitting tonight another document just for the record on this, which is an April 4th letter from 2018 from the director, Keith Niven, to us, memorializing this fact. It's actually been something that's been raised a number of times that this application is vested, but this is one of the earlier acknowledgments of that. The development agreement also includes in the development standards, Appendix L, which is another part, the process that Shelter is vested to. And again, as Tia pointed out, we've been treated differently in that respect, that we actually wouldn't be in front of you this evening. We would be going through a separate process if the city were treating our application as vested to process as they had told us in the past that we would be. The staff report, as Tia and I have both touched on, does make a number of inaccurate statements, but one that I would like to focus on and that's most concerning this evening is the fact that staff is going about and trying to change a vesting determination in that staff report that the director already made. And the code is clear that the director is the only person who can make an interpretation on vesting in the city. He has done that, and it can't be overruled by subsequent staff reports in this proceeding or others. Staff can't unilaterally decide that our application vests only to some regulations and not to others. As you'll see in the staff report, there were a number of instances where the replacement regulations, the substantive regulations, are being applied to our plat application, even though we've been told time and again that they do not apply. Again, the director gets to make the call. Staff cannot overrule that, and even in a community conference such as this one. And it also states a number of times that there's a disagreement over the materials submitted for the plat application. There's no valid reason for any disagreement over the application materials that were submitted. We submitted the preliminary plat application. It was deemed complete. We submitted supplemental materials along the way, in large part in response to concerns from the city about wanting to know how our site development permit applications actually fit with the plat application that's dividing out the lots to make those possible. That's very standard in the development review process for any sort of plat application or a site development permit application, for that matter, to continue to supplement your application with the best and most current information. But for some reason, the city is refusing to show the building footprints and the updated plat materials that we've submitted along the way. Tonight, as you saw in the PowerPoint that was presented, they weren't using the most current one. And this has been a consistent problem along the way. The notice of application that they submitted to the public, at least, did include our full plat with the building footprints and with the accurate allowable development shown. And so we want to make sure that that also gets into the record. It's something we had requested in response to the staff report, but it didn't get included. So again, we've provided a number of supplemental materials tonight. I'll keep that section of this evening's presentation short. We do expect that the materials that we've been provided are incorporated into the record, and would expect that the changes that we've been requesting are actually made so that there is an accurate record in front of the hearing examiner as this moves forward. But with that, I would like to turn it over to Eric from Shelter, who's going to dive into our plat application and just talk about what the community is hopefully here to hear about.
Great. For the benefit of the record, my name is Eric Evans, and I'm also with Shelter Holdings and a member of the High Street Development team. I'm happy to be here. As Gary mentioned, and many of you probably know, we've held a lot of community meetings. We've been engaged with the communities all these 6 years since we bought the property. So it's great to be here and to be moving forward. The application, was, as Tia mentioned and Jackie mentioned, went in August 1st. So anything you can do to help us along the way is very much appreciated. I think Lucy did a good job of organizing where we are, and so I won't spend a whole lot of time on terms of the vicinity map. As she mentioned, the property is a little over 21 acres. What's unusual in a property like this is it's one tax lot. It's one parcel. The good thing about that is we get one tax bill. So it's pretty easy to pay your taxes. But when you think about making an investment, when you think about building a medical office building, or you think about a commercial use or retail use, those types of entities want to have their own lot that's specific to their type of use. So what we have today in front of you is an action to do just that, is to cut up this lot into 10 lots so that we can plan the property in the orderly fashion consistent with the design guidelines of Issaquah Highlands that Gary referenced that have been governing Issaquah Highlands for decades. As Lucy mentioned, the plat also lets us recognize some of the infrastructure that's currently underway and being completed, as well as future improvements like the extension of Northeast 8th that Lucy talked about, and as well as Deer Lane and 6th Avenue that will get improved with the plat applications. The kind of pragmatic reason or planning reason for doing this type of platting action is that it lets us create lots and plan the infrastructure so that we understand exactly how that medical building might be serviced, how that commercial building, how that retail building, how that storage building might be serviced. And on its own property with boundaries and all of the particular review that would be done later or done with the other applications, the SDP, the ASDP, and building permits. In this case, too, the plat lets us answer a question about uses and intensity. The original development agreement allocated a significant amount of development uses for our property. The plat application lets us answer how much intensity on which portions of the property. So it creates a table for each of the blocks and lots about how much commercial retail use we would anticipate on each specific portion of the property. And it also allows us to it also, as we move forward with the plat and the site development applications for the retail medical office, which are also reflected on the plat, it lets us talk to the tenants about road standards, layouts, where they might find access, all those kind of good things. The plat lets us kind of plan it on a block-by-block basis, and it's kind of the first step for bringing those uses we've been discussing all these years with the community, and those restaurant uses, those retail, the entertainment uses, the medical uses, and the storage uses. Obviously, there's a lot of foundation, the background work to subdivide the lots. Lucy touched on it a little bit. All of the allowed development contemplated as part of this plat was under the original Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement, and as such was studied under the environmental impact statements for Issaquah Highlands. In addition, we completed a fairly extensive transportation analysis that allowed us to look at the transportation network on a lot-by-lot basis based on these types of allocation of uses, so we could be sure that each one of these properties, each one of these blocks worked. Similarly, it allows us to look at the street sections that abut. I think Lucy touched on it a little bit, that the road standards as we move through the property is also influenced by the intensity of the uses. So it allows us to study the transportation connections, the abutments associated with the plat. In addition, it allows us to look at which roads should be extended, like we talked about in Northeast 8th. It also allows us, our transportation consultants, if you look at the study, to make recommendations on what roads shouldn't be extended. So if you're into traffic, which I'm sure hopefully some of you are, there's a recommendation from our transportation consultant who says it's not a good idea to extend Park Drive through the property into the Rest Ridge Townhome property. And if it is required, that it should only be a pedestrian or bicycle connection as opposed to a road connection. So the plat lets us kind of make those kind of determinations or recommendations. It also, as Lucy mentioned, allows us to plan the trails where they connect to existing property, where we create those portions of the property. Simultaneously, we also, as Tia and Jackie mentioned, we wanted to make clear all the information was current, so it allows us to show the building footprints and make sure that we're planning the infrastructure appropriately to serve those particular buildings or future buildings. And make adequate provisions for them. Well, I find all this stuff interesting. I do admit creating lot lines isn't the most exciting thing, and my daughter says it's kind of dry, and it's probably true. With that said, you might ask, well, what are we looking to receive in terms of feedback from you? All the lots that we're creating here are consistent with code. They made adequate provisions for water. They made adequate provisions for sewer, traffic, all those components. So it's a fair question as what are we looking for from my perspective. I guess in our view, or my view, limited, it's an opportunity for us to share the information of how this is evolving. We hope you'll stay engaged in the process as we move forward and continue to participate in the site development permits, the building permits, and all the actions that follow. Needless to say, we're anxious to move forward as we've hoping the Development Commission will help us along. Markets do change. Stock markets change. So appreciate kind of expediting us along. We're happy to answer questions. We're happy to stay late if anybody has questions, and look forward to moving forward. And that, I'll...
Thank you. Thank you. Now I would like to invite the public to make comment if they so choose. As I stated earlier, we'd like to remind those in attendance that if you want to maintain a personal record, or I'm still brain dead on that, please sign in and give us an email. You don't have to sign in to speak. We'd like to hear what you have to say. We'd like your comments to pertain to the High Street Collection preliminary plat application and not other development applications that have been submitted by the same applicant or on any other development proposal for that matter. Or does anybody from the public wish to speak? Don't all jump up at once. Great, please, that's fine.
You got a checkbook in here? Hello, my name is Mike Zalewski. I am a resident of West Highlands Park, and I'm not exactly sure what I can talk about here, but it sounds like it should be plat-oriented, if I'm right, Lucy. So I'm guessing at a different venue, possibly we'll be able to provide our inputs for what your proposals are for each parcel of land, so I'll hold off on that. So in terms of just generalities and the plat information, I would just like to have a good conversation on both sides. My main concern would be the Discovery Drive corridor, to just make sure we do take into account everything that's going on there, and that we have the hospital and that they're still going to be building some buildings there. And of course, I live on the end of the road there, and West Ridge South also has access that way. The one intersection for 8th Street or 8th Avenue, that one is currently a stoplight, so it would be good to think about some alternatives there, because that is such a close intersection to where you turn in from Highlands Drive, and I could see that as maybe potentially leading to a backup situation. So if there's any alternatives for better traffic flow, we might as well consider those now than later. Yeah, otherwise, the neck down idea sounds great, but yeah, let's just make sure that there's adequate room on all sides for pedestrians and bicyclists. That would probably be all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the public? Well, seeing none, we'll move on to comments from the commissioners for questions for the staff and the applicant.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for staff.
Please.
Regarding maximum block size.
Maximum?
Block size, right. So in the staff report, we are directed that the standards to look at are the comprehensive plan, a chapter of the IMC 1819B replacement regulations and, as applicable, Chapter 1819A IMC SIDS and the IMC. So in terms of the SIDS being referenced there, I'm thinking of Chapter 18 of the SIDS, which is the Architecture and Urban Design Manual. And in that manual, there's specification discussion of maximum block size. So I'm wondering if that applies in this case.
Chapter 18 does not apply because the Architectural Review Committee has purview over projects in Issaquah Highlands, and much of what's in 18 is taken care of by them. So Chapter 18 is excluded.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I guess I'm confused. So SIDS applies but not completely?
Would you like me to look up the provision?
Just, yeah, given that it mentions that SIDS applies, but then,
Well, it's, the central Issaquah standards apply where there are not provisions within 1819B. So I have some copies if you'd like to look at it. Share those down. Provision 1819B 120, which refers to the Architectural Review Committee, states that in the second sentence that the Architecture and Urban Design Manual located in, it says Chapter 16, which may be the chapter it was at the time, does not apply within Issaquah Highlands.
so, okay, so I'm reading on page 5 of 10 of the staff report. So it says to review the proposal in compliance with the comp plan, this chapter replacement regulations, and as applicable, Chapter 18 SIDS in the IMC. So I guess what's saying to the extent that SIDS would apply, it would, but this is saying that SIDS doesn't apply here?
So the way the replacement regulations are written, you would start with those, and where elements are covered in 1819B, then that's the provisions you would use.
Okay.
If there were missing elements, for instance, there's no parking standards in here, then you would go to the parking chapter of Central Issaquah Standards, which I believe is 8 and 16, and you would use that. Then if there was provisions that are not in the Central Issaquah Standards, then you would go to the Issaquah Municipal Code. So for instance, critical area standards in 1810, that's the only place they're located in our codes. So this is why we're rewriting Title 18. And so it's that sort of incremental stepping through the codes based on starting with 1819B.
Right, and then block size is one of those items that's covered by the first step instead of SIDS.
Actually, there are not block size standards in 1819B. It is in the urban design guidelines. It is a performance standard, not a prescriptive standard. So Central Issaquah uses prescriptive standards, but Issaquah Highlands uses performance standards.
Okay. Better
So-
study that for the final, I guess.
Yeah, so follow on to that, Lucy, you just mentioned the urban design guidelines on page 32 of 154 in section F. It refers to those Issaquah Highlands urban design guidelines. Is that what you're referring to there, that there is this separate document, and that still does pertain?
Yes, so 1819B has two attachments. One is the Issaquah Highlands Development Agreements Urban Design Guidelines. It's exactly the same document that was in the development agreement. And then the other attachment is the
principles, goals, and commitments, and that's the same as the development agreement. It takes a master's degree to do this.
If I may, just as a follow-on to that question, so we have some clarification on that as well.
You need to go to the microphone.
Yes, I'm happy to speak up or go for the microphone. So you heard my objections earlier, but I think there's some significant confusion. We've been told that we are vested to the development standards and the development agreement on this application. And so your question is justified in terms of what are we looking at in terms of the regulations. The SIDs don't apply to our applications. The development standards are what applies to our applications. That's what the city has told us in the past. So I guess to add on as a clarifying question, we're thoroughly confused as to why the staff report tonight is saying and applying the replacement regulations to our applications if they're not supposed to apply, and why you are being asked to consider those in your review tonight. I don't know if that's something that the city is prepared to provide an answer for tonight, but it's one that we haven't received an answer to.
So I think, Lucy, you just referred to Issaquah Highlands guiding principles, also on page 32 of 154. That's section E.
Yes.
There's a statement there under principle number 2 that the purpose of pedestrian-friendly design to give circulation priority to pedestrian scale proximities, activities, and orientation.
Yes.
I wonder, I have, I guess, a question about blocks. Some of these blocks are, it seems to me, over 500 feet long. Is that really giving priority to pedestrian and bicycle circulation? And I guess that's a question for the applicant.
Well, I think what Lucy was saying in response to your earlier question is that the Issaquah Highlands regulations, which are under the development agreement, don't have a minimum block size. So from that standpoint, there is no minimum block size to apply there. But to speak to your concern about pedestrian connections, those are something that will be made through the projects as they move forward. So what you're seeing with the Plat is where the infrastructure goes and where the streets go through. You can also see the building footprints on the Plat, and so you can see that there are opportunities for, and we plan to implement pedestrian connections through those blocks, because you're right, it wouldn't make sense to have these big blocks that are just solid building. There needs to be connection. And really, this Plat serves a really important function in connecting, particularly the Swedish property to Grand Ridge Plaza. Right now, it's a little bit of an awkward walk to get from one to the other. And as you fill that in, particularly with both the ground floor uses that will be in our medical office building and then also our retail uses that are up towards the north end of our property, it provides a more comfortable way for people to get from one area to the other.
So you kind of have the thought that there will be through block passages of some kind. There may be alleys or other plazas, ways of supporting mixed use, mobility that is not auto.
Yes, there will be pedestrian connections throughout the...
They'd be similar to a parking lot or the sidewalk that went in from the artillery? Sorry.
Yeah, so in some cases, they're pedestrian pathways that are through parking lots. It just depends on which block you're talking about.
I would add that you're right that is one of the things that we're looking at. It is a performance standard, and so we're interested in the community perspective because it isn't a prescriptive standard where to meet the principle of pedestrian scale, where those additional kinds of through block passages, I'm using that as a general term, not a particular standard. where the commission sees that as a necessity to meet that principle.
And I think we've got proposed in our materials, we proposed that there would be a through block passageway on each block, but that the locations need to be determined through site development plan review, because it wouldn't make sense to prescribe this is exactly where it has to go necessarily at this point in time. The one exception to that is the one on Block E, which is closest to the West Highlands Park neighborhood, and that is in that location so that it lines up with the trail that Polygon's building and makes that connection to Discovery Drive.
Can I wait? A kind of related question. So, Lucy, you showed on the graphics, particularly the kind of bike pedestrian connections, and they were kind of different forms. You had multi-use trail, we had bike lanes, we had just pedestrian sidewalks. So there was kind of a mix of things, and I guess I'm curious about the connectivity between those and how that works, because it's important as you're transitioning from one area to the other, if you're either biking, walking, or driving, that the experience is intentional and it makes sense. So if you're moving from the multi-use trail and then you're going to move into a bike lane that's, or a share lane, how that happens. And so I think how that connectivity and consistency in that connectivity happens in the Plat, not only for pedestrians, but how bicyclists, kind of the full multimodal solution lays out, because it seemed a little choppy to me in the graphics, and I know that was a really high-level graphic, but I think that thinking that through is going to be important to how this all integrates and develops into the future.
That's right. In many neighborhoods of Issaquah Highlands, the assumption in the street standards is that bikes and cars are moving at a similar pace, and therefore they are sharing the road, which would be that sub-collector standard that was quite prevalent. But there are other more significant roads where separate bike facilities are shown. Discovery Drive is a good example of that. It's not only the question of the multi-use trail, it sort of ends at Discovery Drive. There, it picks up further south down near Swedish, but for a bicyclist that chooses, that is either heading east or west on Discovery Drive, they are sharing the road with an ambulance. And so, thinking about how to design those bike facilities to ensure that both those uses can share the road prism between curbs is going to be an important part of the details.
Right.
Going back to process a little bit, so the only thing that will fall under our purview is the preliminary plat application. All other design review will go to the Highlands ARC or whatever they call them, or DRC.
Can you, I want to make sure I'm answering the question you're asking, Kevin. When you say all other design review?
Well, I guess, the site development permit. I guess what's under our purview would be the best way to ask it.
So the site development permits have already come through. Typically, the purview of the Architectural Review Committee is fairly light with land use permits. They do look at them to ensure that the site planning is going to sets up well for the requirements that they have. The example I would give is that in the West Ridge South single-family plat, when the Architectural Review Committee looked at that against the architectural standards, the lots were very regular, and for that neighborhood type, there was supposed to be more diversity, so they required some tweaks to the lot arrangement so that it would facilitate that when the home designs come in. But so it's a fairly high level. When you get to the actual building design or landscape design, it's much more detailed. In terms of architecture, it's style, materials, colors, windows, doors, a lot of the things that you're used to looking at through the design manual are handled by the Architectural Review Committee.
Okay.
For clarity, is that you just when you refer to architectural review, you're referring to IHCA? Is it the builder ARC or the retail ARC?
There is both a builder. So I know, Ben, you know 100 times more about the ARC than I do. There is a ARC that the IHCA manages for looking at all of this new construction. I'm not well versed in the names of all the different ARCs that Issaquah Highlands has for all the different kind of life cycle of a building. But yes, there are specialized ones just for these projects.
Has there been a discussion regarding the phasing of these blocks? Obviously, it's a large site in various building components. But are you allowed, or can you speak to, you know, the timeframes of like when these blocks will be developed, or an idea? Part of me is kind of envisioning uses kind of standing by themselves for at parts of the properties.
We would love to be able to give you a time frame. Unfortunately, the way that our permit applications have been being processed leaves us in a position where we have no way to know that. As Eric alluded to, there is strong interest both from the community but also from tenants in some of the uses that we're proposing. So we are anxious to move them forward and would likely do that in a phased manner, but we're anxious to move all of the uses that we've proposed at this point.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Thank you. And I just want to echo what Michael mentioned earlier. I think it'll be important to understand the relationship of the connections between the streets, not only the streets, though, the blocks in between them as well. I mean, if I'm standing on Block D, for example, I mean, what takes me over to Block E, right? And how do I get there? Do I take the sidewalk? Will there be paths, pedestrian paths, gravel, paved, ADA accessible, obviously, too. So just a comment on that. Oh, another question, sorry, while I'm at it. I saw a mention earlier about a SEPA that was, I guess, reviewed in, what, it was 1995 or something. Is that being vested? Is that, you're proceeding with that SEPA application? Is there a new SEPA that has to be completed with this, or?
That's under, I think that's another item in which we don't agree.
I see.
Sorry?
Wait.
Okay. Well, so if the city is in disagreement that there's a new SEPA process that applies to us, our understanding has always been, and what the city has told us, is that SEPA has been completed for this project under the Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement. If there is a change in that position now, that would be news to us.
Yeah, so I mean, as you guys probably know, the Issaquah Highlands development, when they did the development agreement, when they planned the whole development from the very get-go, they did an environmental impact statement that evaluated the maximum build-out under that development agreement. And so all of the development that has happened in Issaquah Highlands falls under that environmental review. And then there are certain aspects that are sort of examined in a more project-specific way as specific projects move forward. But absolutely, as a vested application, which until tonight, I honestly did not think that the city was trying to change that vesting determination. But as a vested project, we definitely fall under that environmental review.
Thank you.
Is it possible to pull up the most recent map that shows everything? I'm thinking the one that I think Core Design did on 2/8/19 that shows some of the other things. I think it'd be interesting to talk about all the different connections and roads and make sure we understand them. 29. This one shows the West Ridge Mall. So a couple questions about this. Do you understand, as I understand, is Deer Avenue, I saw one reference to it, but I'm still not sure. Is it the very bottom here? And what does that connect into? And what part would you build out?
So I think Deer Lane is the portion that's sort of on the back side of our blocks D and E, and was constructed by Polygon. Lucy, correct me if I'm getting that wrong, but I think that's the part that's named Deer Lane now. And so that street is already built. So they got an easement for the other half that was located on our property and constructed that street completely.
And then that connects into, that's a road that will go through West Ridge North?
So I just want to help any spatially challenged commissioners that the maps, the north keeps rotating on various maps. So I just want to give you a heads up. At the moment, north is to the left. Deer Lane is, I don't know that, Yep. And then the road that's coming off of that at the bottom of this map is called West Ridge Way, and it heads north all the way up to High Street.
That's the new road that will go through West Ridge North?
Right. It's going to replace a portion of High Street.
That will be made into trail?
Exactly. Okay. And it is being constructed by Polygon.
So the connection would be from up at High Street and 9th, you would come down High Street through West Ridge North, and then eventually connect into Deer Lane and take a left there, and that would all.
Right, so there would be a jog, so you'd kind of have that corner, that road would be an L, and then 6th would be the first place where you could continue to the south.
Okay, and then that road would not be extended further west?
Deer Lane.
Correct? Deer Lane?
No. I mean, not in this proposal or Polygon's proposals.
Is there, I'm curious, what is west of, if you extended Deer Lane west, at what point do you get over to the, I don't know if it's the road next to?
So the project, the neighborhood just to the west of Polygon's property is called West Highlands Park. It's fully developed. There is a road right on, I can't pull up GIS at this moment, but there is kind of an alley Woonerf type road right along that seam between West Ridge and West Highlands Park. And I don't think anyone is planning to interconnect that because Discovery Drive connects just to the south of there, as well as Ellis, where it's kind of curving down the hill. It also connects. So
there's also a significant grade change there, and so where Polygon's proposing that trail connection and we're continuing it, it kind of sits on the top of before the grade drops off, and then the alley is right below that, the existing alley.
And where is so there's the road that would connect, the West Ridge Road would connect into Deer Lane, and then where's the trail?
So the trail connection is all the way
right through there, okay.
At the far west edge of our property.
Okay, so the trail that comes from the south down by West Ridge South, I guess it is, coming up there, that road, you can connect into this trail and then keep going onto the old High Street Trail.
Can we switch back? Because I think I need to be on GIS to better explain this.
So, do it. Oh. So I think what you're identifying is something that, well, let me start with your first question. So this property line right here, does that show up there? So this is that sort of alley Vunerf that runs between Ellis and Discovery Drive in West Highlands Park. Tia, really accurately described that there's a lot of topographic change, and there's quite a few easements and things, quite significant utilities that run through there. So the trail you can't build buildings on it, most likely. So the trail is a good use of that area and provides.
And that trail would be sort of at the top of that hill above the Wooner sort of area and connect?
I don't know topographically where theirs is. The one to the north of it is almost down. It's maybe a 4-foot wall up to the trail and then another wall up to the project.
Okay.
So it's about halfway in between.
Okay, but there would be trail essentially from Discovery Drive up to High Street.
Yes.
That would go along the very west edge of the shelter property.
So the trail they've proposed is in here. Polygon has proposed one as part of what's called Block 4, and then it connects up through here, and then half the road up to right around this corner is where the multi-use trail and kind of linear park that Polygon is building. So High Street would come from 9th and turn in here, and that road would not continue to the west anymore.
Right, and then so the trail you would add, essentially we'd end up being able to do a walking trail down through the old High Street, straight south, all the way down around the south side of Swedish and connect back in and everything, so.
So yes and no. Shelter is completing the piece on their property.
Yeah.
The trail that's around Swedish starts right here. The one around Westridge South starts about here. So we have 2 roadways, one of which is fairly quiet in Westridge South. We did not know that the trails were Westridge South came in so far in advance of the other Westridge properties that we didn't know this trail opportunity would be there. I think at some point in the future, the city may explore building a trail along here on the west side of that road to complete that, provide a trail connection. But right now, it would be either via sidewalk or roadway to make that connection.
Okay, great, thank you. And then if we could go back to your plat map again, if you don't mind.
I think I've got it. Oh, that doesn't show up very well, does it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try.
So another question then, so the question about Park Drive not being extended, it looks like from the West Ridge North plat map, it shows a road connection that would connect into Federal Drive.
Yes.
Yeah, but nothing that would connect into Park Drive. So even if you extended Park Drive, it would just run into somebody's backyard, it looks like.
Well, I think that this, again, because these have been pending for so long, the Westridge single-family plat was changed right as they came into hearing, which I think, because they were treated as vested to process, they went in front of UVDC instead of you guys. And so the city at the last minute asked them to make a connection there.
Or the connection for Federal Drive?
A connection at Park. And so they made some modified version of a Woonerf, was my understanding, although I think it's a little bit more street-like than a typical Woonerf. But it is set up that it could be limited so that only bicycle and pedestrian comes through, which it was really what our recommendation from our transportation consultant was, that it doesn't make sense to have a commercial piece transition mid-block like that into essentially somebody's side yard. It would make a lot more sense to have that be the bicycle and pedestrian connection.
Okay, so it
Not
would,
needed from a circulation standpoint.
right, so it would, I guess back to Richard's question, it would still, it would be a known, some kind of trail, bike path, whatever, that would break up that block then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that would match up with the road. Thank you. And then one question, I guess, just out of curiosity, on Lot 1 and Block A, that border between Lot 1 and Lot 2 has a jog to it. I'm just curious why, if you start with a blank slate, why the jog and...
Oh, if you look at, let's see. So if you look at this one, it explains it a little bit better. When we are laying out the retail development and where the various uses go, it makes sense to have a building there for several reasons. One, as you come down Park Drive, it gives sort of the focal point to the fact that that is then a retail development. We also saw that as an opportunity to make the option of having a, what do they call it, Festival Street. So if you have your shopping center there, if you're doing an event, you could sort of close off that street access if you were having an event and make it more of a common community space temporarily. That building location there, too, was one that, as we talked early on with the community, when I sat down with Jeff Walker, he was really adamant that on your retail stuff, you should have a second story on some of it. And so we actually changed the application in response to his suggestion that you could have some of the second story, maybe a second story restaurant or a deck that looks out, because there are really great views from there. So that was an ideal spot for that as well, because of the way that the grade goes there.
And so the connecting trail then would jog around, would follow that property line and jog around down to Westridge North?
Yeah, I'm not sure it would follow exactly the property line, but yes, there would be, so on the site development plan, we had proposed sort of that whole back side or west side of Block A had some pretty extensive landscaping and pedestrian connection, because we felt like that built a good buffer between residential, because you really truly have somebody's single family backyards backing up against that. So where exactly and how that connection gets made, it's kind of hard to explain without having that in front of us.
But I guess in one respect, the cars that come down Park into that center there, if they came through there, their lights aren't going straight into somebody's backyard then.
Right, that
if there's
too.
a building there, right? Okay. I think that's all the questions I have. Oh, sorry. So Federal Drive comes down, and at this point, it doesn't connect into, you wouldn't be able to connect into Westridge because you don't have the property that connects there, right? With that?
Actually, Polygon has built or is permitted to build Federal all the way up to Shelter's property. So the roads on either side, the stub from 9th and the road up from Westridge Way are already permitted.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Tia, has there been, has fire department been engaged in terms of which access points they need, in terms of which Woonerfs they need to access, or their circulation around the properties?
I know that with respect to the site development permit applications, that yes, fire was consulted. I don't know if independently on the plat. Lucy might be able to answer that.
They have.
Okay.
All right, one more question. Lot line adjustments, I presume that if you came in and said we were looking to develop this block, you can do lot line adjustments to do that?
Right, not only lot line adjustments, but short plats. If there was further subdivision, that's a relatively simple process.
Okay, thank you.
Question on a different subject. The plans show, it looks like on-site detention facilities, maybe those are temporary, but as far as the detention structures, were they structures below grade, or will there be detention ponds and facilities integrated as part of the development?
We don't anticipate having any open ponds.
Open ponds, okay. The reason I raised the question is if you did, I was curious about how that would be leveraged in the development, so, okay, structured.
Follow-on question about water detention. Page 83 of 154, it says a fee in lieu of detention may be paid to the city for impervious areas not detained by a detention facility. This fee will be calculated at 62.8 cents per impervious square foot. My question is, what was used to develop that yardstick? Is there an IMC reference for that? And second part of the question, how much impervious area do you assume is going to be generating water that's not detained?
And now you're getting outside of the realm of my ability to answer that question. I can tell you that the numbers in that calculation came from Doug Schlepp at the city, so he's probably the right one to answer as to how that calculation was created. And I think they've used it for another project or two in Issaquah Highlands. As far as impervious surface, I would need to get my engineer to answer that for you, and we're happy to do that.
I have a question that maybe Lucy, for that process, because I had the same question, I read that, or the question that, so if you're not detaining the water, you can just pay a fee. Well, the water still, I guess, is there. So does the city then use those fees to create more stormwater detention? It can handle that? Is that the idea, or?
So this is in the applicant's materials, and so I don't know exactly what the basis is. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I just, I don't know exactly where that number came from. I do know that as Tia said, that the city has done an evaluation of the system up there. There was excess capacity in what is called the flow splitter, which is this giant facility up near Westridge South. I don't currently know whether there is excess capacity at this time. And so that would be something when we dig into the more detailed review of the preliminary plat that we would assess.
Thank you.
More comments?
You want to go through our more questions, or just go through comments we might have about it?
Yeah, if there are no more questions, then maybe some final comments, or at least some comments.
Well, I guess my comments that in terms of the layout of the plan, it all seems to make sense to me. The not extending Park Drive, the extension of Federal, and well, some of these roads are already in place, and that the ones you'd be connecting, the 8th and I think 6th and Deer Lane, all of that, the layout seems to make sense to me. And I think the fact that if we do get a pedestrian path that goes High Street all the way around, it's going to be a big benefit to this whole area. I guess otherwise, I didn't see anything that stood out to me otherwise that I would think and say this doesn't work.
Similar, I'll weigh in. As far as the layout, yeah, I don't see anything that looks inconsistent with what you would want to see in this sort of a mixed-use area. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the attention to how the connections work, the form of the pedestrian experience, the bicycles transitioning from a more busy arterial street to onto the trails, et cetera, that it's going to be really important to the experience that you create here. So obviously that happens as more development proposals advance, but I think that'll be important. Also, we heard some differences in materials here, and I don't know that that's for us to resolve, but how to reconcile the differences as this advances is going to be something that you, the applicant and the city, are going to need to continue to work on. Eventually, we'll get to the end of this, and hopefully we'll see some development happen before long. But I think as far as the Plat layout is concerned, I don't see anything that concerns me.
So from a comment perspective, I guess, being pretty naive about all this, just curious, there seemed to be a fairly significant pushback from some portion of the community, a small portion of the community, about some of the development, some of the proposed development. And I'm just wondering where in the process those decisions get made, or how the community has the opportunity to have that dialogue. And then obviously the continued difference of opinion on which regulations are going to control what the requirements are, and when that decision gets made, or how that decision gets made. So I'd be curious from the city on answering those two questions, unless you don't want to. You don't have to sign in. We know who you are.
Well, I think that will be up to the hearing examiner to sort out from a technical and legal perspective. In terms of public comment, those, the land use permits, the site development permits have already gone through the process. The storage building, and I haven't read all of these in detail, but I know the storage building is one of the things that has been regularly commented on. It was an allowed use under the development agreement, and it's an allowed use under the replacement regulations. So I'm not liking a storage building is probably not going to change that if that's a use that a property owner selects. So
that's the purview. That's the purview of the developer, to be able to make those decisions as long as it's consistent with.
If it's an allowed use, it's an allowed use.
Right.
But we will look at those comments in more detail and provide answers to those questions, even if they aren't directly related to the Plat, just as we do with any set of comments we get from the public that may misunderstand what's being covered. We want to answer those questions, and so we would do that within the memo.
Okay.
And they would, obviously, that memo, as we said, is going to go back out to parties of record, and by making comment, those people become parties of record, and so they would receive that and have an opportunity to ask further questions or hopefully get their questions answered.
And I guess in essence, you could tell somebody from the public that all three of the applications, including the storage facility, were denied by the Development Commission to get to that step to go to the hearing examiner and so forth. So if it was it would have to come up again, I would presume. Well, maybe it wouldn't come up before us, but it would have to come up again in a new format to get something like that approved, I presume.
I think some of the, it's a good question, and some of the confusion is, so some of you sat through the hearings on the SDP and ASDP applications and made your determination on those. Those have been appealed, the determination has been appealed to the hearing examiner, so that vesting issue is going to be in front of him on the SDP and ASDP applications. Where we are thoroughly confused as of this evening, as we've been told that our plat application, which is obviously related to them, it's laying out, the property boundaries, but the plat application, a separate application, has always been vested, and the new replacement regulations, as does state law, recognize that plats vest. So there shouldn't be any dispute that we are vested in terms of the plat to the development standards and the development agreement. The back and forth that you're hearing on that this evening is thoroughly astounding to us, and is the first time, particularly on issues like SEPA, that we've ever encountered the city taking a different position than what they've told us in the past with how those are going to apply. So it is a good question. It's one that we also have and that we've been asking, particularly because recently the city has been saying, well, you vest to some standards, but not all, which again is not consistent with state law, not consistent with their code, and we haven't gotten an answer from them at all on why that would be the case. So we are also hoping to get some sort of answer in this process to that, particularly before our application goes in front of the hearing examiner, because we didn't think that would be an issue.
Further comments? I have to say, I'm used to going till 10 o'clock, so so I appreciate everybody's attention. I wish unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, I wish we'd had more participation from the public, because I think that clearly this is a great opportunity for people to provide input and have some discussion and input into what's going on. But that being the case, we take what we get, and we appreciate everybody's attendance, and we probably ought to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now.